easy way to describe it, yeah.
Fuck off.
Been rolling this whole time.
Welcome to another horror, singular, of Netflix. I'm Martin and this is Alan. And today we are going to be reviewing The House of the Devil, or is it just House of the Devil?
That's a very good question. I should really have checked that before we started this video. But regardless, it's a very kind of retro-inflected horror film about a young woman called Samantha who is a college student in, I want to say Connecticut because that's where the film was shot, but I don't know if it's actually...
It has a New England-y sort of
like that kind of thing.
Is Connecticut New England?
For the purposes of this video, let's pretend that it is.
Okay.
But she's a college student who is moving into her first apartment, and in a quest for some extra cash to cover the deposit for this, she takes a job as a babysitter, in traditional horror film style, of course. Unfortunately, when she gets a lift to the house where she expects to be sitting the child of her best mate, and when they get there they find out that it's not actually to look after a young boy or girl, but it's in fact the comatose mother of the rather creepy middle-aged couple that live there. Now, her mate tries to dissuade her from taking the job, but when the man promises to pay her $400, bearing in mind that this is set in the early 1980s, and that would have been mega bucks. She reluctantly agrees to take the job. And I think I don't know if that's maybe about as much as I can say about this one without giving the game away.
It's quite an atmospheric film, isn't it? It's interesting. It's not just like a kind of 70s, 80s vibe in terms of like how it's shot and how it looks and where it's set. It has that kind of slow burn vibe that was quite widely used then. A lot of films had that sort of feel to it. It definitely has a sort of...
Well, one of the reviews I was reading, I think it was Ebert's one, was actually suggesting there was something a bit Hitchcockian about the way that it plays out, just the way that it is kind of... It's very much not about what you're seeing here, although I think it kind of is touching base a lot with... I thought particularly the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I thought
it's a lot more low key, I think, than the Texas Chainsaw, but it has that similar sort of grain and the way it's shot is quite.
I think even the main actress, whose name I should really have looked up, I thought physically she even looks like Sally from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. She doesn't have the red hair, but I don't know whether maybe they're going for kind of a composite of her from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Laurie from Halloween.
Yeah, one of the things that is similar to Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the fact that obviously Texas Chainsaw Massacre has this reputation for being a hideously gory film, really violent and horrible. Actually, there's very little on-screen gore. Occasionally it's generally very low key, and occasionally there's just extreme violence comes out of nowhere and hits you and then moves on. And I think this film does the same thing, because for a film called House of the Devil there's not actually much violence, but there's a constant sort of like disturbing kind of slightly warped vibe, and then out of nowhere something hideous happens and then it just moves on very quickly. It's rather like it's kind of almost the antithesis of your like today's modern horror, where it's like, torture like Saw and Hostel and that kind of thing, where it's like prolonged scenes of gruesome torture that actually after a while you become desensitized to it, you don't really care. With this it's like a constant build of tension, and then it hits you with fast brutal violence and then just cuts away. And although it's less graphic and less extreme, I think in a way it's a lot more effective, a lot more tense.
I think it makes when the finale comes around, I think it does make it that much more intense. You've got this just slow build up to it, and then kind of bam, it really gets going at the end.
Have you watched any of Inside Number 9, the TV show from the guys who made The League of Gentlemen? Inside Number 9, no. Inside Number 6, Inside 9?
Oh, is that the one that's running at the moment?
Yeah.
I know the one.
Well, the previous series of Inside Number 9, the final episode is almost a remake of this film, like scene for scene.
It's not a porn version, maybe.
No. I think it may be an accident, but the Inside Number 9 version came out after this film, and it almost beat for beat follows the plot of this film, which really surprised me. A little bit more humor, but. Very, very, very similar. Which
you might want to check. It might be a fromage free or a homage.
No, I looked it up and I couldn't find much about it. There was no, even on IMDb, when you look up the movie connections and it says like, references and all that. There was nothing. Nobody seems to have picked up on it. But it beat for beat, it's exactly the same. It's not exactly the same.
Just
Very
like-
similar.
Knowing IMDb, they weren't claiming that it was referenced in that. Was it Dead End or something? The one that
The zombie movie that doesn't exist. I mean, yeah,
totally
yeah.
exists, guys.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was. It wouldn't
No.
it wouldn't make any less sense. But yeah, I really liked the film. I liked the slow burn. It's one of those films like Suspiria, where I think the style of it and the atmosphere of it is more important than the plot. Because the plot really is
Yeah,
interesting,
it's
but
quite
quite
basic.
straightforward and quite simple. Because as a slow film, there's not a lot of time for complicated plotting to emerge. It's more about how you feel in the moment and what it puts across and the kind of visuals and stuff.
Very handsomely shot as well. I
It
thought.
really is.
Yeah.
Alan,
Yes.
did we do the Innkeepers
I don't think we
for
did.
a
I'm
double
afraid.
feature?
I
No.
don't think we did.
Michael's here as well.
Yeah, that's the same.
Come on in, Mike.
That's the same director,
Really?
and it's. I actually think it's a much better film, but people always hold.
Did you
up
watch House of the Devil?
House of the Devil. I've seen it a long time ago.
Okay.
So
I actually
is,
thought it was pretty overrated.
Really?
is the Innkeepers going to be a future double feature episode?
Maybe, yeah.
Well, part of why I liked House of the Devil is because it wasn't what I expected it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a modern horror film with 70s and 80s horror tropes sort of thrown in, but it really just was a 70s or 80s horror film, which I guess is maybe why some people don't like it. Doesn't, I guess in a way it doesn't really add anything new. There's
That
nothing
was going
much
to be my only complaint.
unexpected
about it, yeah.
happens in it, but it's just so subtly and nicely done. It's done with so much love and so much care and so much attention to detail for evoking that feel that you get from watching those horror films from the era where horror was coming out of just purely gothic kind of Dracula and kind of finding its way into being a little bit more violent and a little bit more brutal and a little bit more disturbing, but hadn't sort of reached the excesses of like 80s horror where it's like
Yeah,
it
it
gets to the
wasn't-
point of being hokey.
It wasn't like the Evil Dead 2 level.
yeah, that kind of middle ground there. Even films like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which isn't really a horror film, but it has that same sort of gritty 70s, early 80s vibe, which I quite like, and it's so well done. It's almost like you quite often think that kind of feel of a certain era film is lost, but I was really impressed with the way that we're just able to bring it back, just with a little bit of attention.
And I
to
think
detail.
they really do go the extra mile to make you think that it is something from that era in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, right down to the way even the way they shoot the credits at the end, the kind
Yeah.
of the style of the font on screen. You know,
Uh-huh.
you would almost think you were. It made me think of like an episode of Columbo or something.
yeah, I know what
Text,
you mean, I know what you mean, yeah.
But
Just one more thing.
yeah, I mean, I think it's weird that if you compare it to something like kind of Dune's or 80s homages has become kind of a cool thing to do now. With
But they
films like
overdo
that,
it.
but-
It's like they
Yeah.
pump it up to
But this
to
doesn't
10
feel
minutes.
this doesn't feel so much like that though. This actually does feel like you were watching something from the
'Cause
time.
Drive is a great film, but they take the like kind of 80s style and they give it a kind of modern sensibility, whereas
Yeah.
this just is a
Yeah,
70s or 80s
yeah.
film that, like brought into the present day. So for that, yeah, I guess you kind of maybe got to take a few points off because it doesn't really bring anything new to it. But for what it set out to do, which I think is just emulate that period and create a film that didn't get made in the 70s or 80s. And just make it today and give you another 70s or 80s film that never existed before. I think it does a really good job. So I mean, I think for me it's solid 8,
Yeah.
7 or 8 out of 10.
I mean-
you really didn't. You thought it was.
I enjoyed it. The only thing is I don't know if I would necessarily say it was massively memorable for me.
Yeah.
I thought it was an entirely pleasant way to pass like an hour and a half. But
Yeah.
as I said, I don't know if it's one that would necessarily linger on in the mind. Although
Yeah.
I did also appreciate just throwing it in that they give a little cameo to Dee Wallace from The Howling.
Is she in it?
Yeah,
I
just
never
she's the
noticed.
landlady at the start.
Oh,
yeah,
no way. That's awesome.
Yeah, that was-
The Howling's
that was
another
nice.
film similar.
Yeah.
kind of vibe to it. But if you have seen the final episode of the first series of Inside Number 9, you probably don't need to see this film because
Seen it
it's
already. Yeah.
I've almost seen it already, and vice versa. If you've seen this film, you probably don't need to see that. But I would advise you could probably watch them both and compare just how close two films can get, without seeming to be aware of the other.
Parallel thinking going on.
I mean, they could have ripped it off, but I can't see the guys behind that. They're pretty good. I wouldn't see them just copying something deliberately so closely.
Yeah.
But yeah, a solid 8 out of 10 for me. What would you give it?
I don't know. Numbers is never my thing.
Numbers.
But yeah.
Numbers.
Yeah, let's
Numerify
go with that. Yeah.
72 out of 10.
Yeah, we'll go with that. Out of 10, exactly. Out of 10. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I would say it was definitely one to watch.
You waited till I was
Sorry,
giving the
yeah.
sign off. You're like,
So I just completely screw up.
Yeah. Definitely one to watch. Alan Graham.
Yes.